I think we're live, by the way.
We're live and people are listening to us talk about
Good.
asteroids and
I didn't
meteors
realize the
hitting the
webinar had
Earth.
started, so we're off to a really great
Welcome,
start. We're
everybody.
gonna
Love
we're
it.
gonna
It's
give
also got a
everybody a
comedy
minute.
element.
Greatest
Yes.
webinar
Well,
ever. All
I know
right.
this is actually perfect because people are sort of let in on what the prep was all around, which is if the sky is falling. So we're definitely gonna dive into that over the course of the next hour and
Give a
go
quick
from there.
explanatory. No, you have to give a quick explanatory for those that joined early about why the sky is falling.
Absolutely. So, for those that don't know Lisa yet, and we will introduce all our panelists shortly, Lisa lives just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, where, as many of you probably read in the news, there was a asteroid that, or was it a meteor? This is where
Meteor.
my scientific skills, and I probably need to ask my third grade daughter who's learning all about this in school in terms of the difference. But a meteor exploded over the sky in Cleveland, and this has really left a lot of questions for some of our panelists in terms of if the world is a safe place or not. So, which is obviously very fragile. But on
Just to give
that note, why don't we? I see we've got a lot of people who
Noah,
have
that was
joined.
a 4-ton meteor traveling at one point at 44,000 miles per hour. Like that's the important part there. So anyway,
There you go. Well, for those that don't know me, I'm Noah Sudo, Senior Vice President at Whiteboard Advisors. I co-lead our post-secondary practice. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to moderate this webinar with our great panel, who we're going to hear from in a second. I want to make sure to thank Phill, CEO of Skillwell, and our co-hosts for this webinar, which our hope is that this will be the first of many, and we'll say a little bit more about that at the end. Before we start, just a couple of housekeeping things since everybody's been listening in on our asteroid conversation anyway. So you may have heard that we're going to keep the Q&A open. We encourage folks to ask questions throughout. We will leave time at the near the end for some questions and answers specifically from the folks who are viewing. But again, we want to make sure to work in your questions from the start. We've got a great group of 5 panelists who are going to join and share their perspectives. We're going to start out with each one individually and just learning a little bit more about their organization and their perspective on this. And then we're going to actually end that portion with Phill, who's going to share a little bit more about why he wanted to co-host this and sort of what's next. Then we're going to tee off into a great conversation about where we are with adaptive learning. And for those that have been following the higher ed world, we know that adaptive learning is not a new term, and it's been something that's been around and really was a big there was a big movement for it about a decade ago. And we've seen a lot of increase in its usage, and especially in areas around competency-based education, which we're going to hear from Lisa in a little bit to talk a little bit more about. It's really started to grow, and we've seen a lot of momentum. And now with new technology and Gen AI, it seems that there's an opportunity for a rapid scaling of this work, which has immense potential to really help scale personalized pathways. So we're going to get into all of this today. And actually, first, why don't we hear from our meteor survivor or meteorite survivor, Dr. Lisa McIntyre-Hite, who's EVP of CBEN, the Competency-Based Education Network. Lisa, I'd really love to hear early on, from your perspective in terms of like, how do you see the evolution of adaptive learning in terms of today's environment in which skills is everything we hear about. How are you sort of seeing this rise? Where is there are you seeing sort of the benefits of adaptive learning, and where's the potential?
Yeah, I mean, so for CBEN, we believe that credentials or degrees or even a job title doesn't really tell us the full story of what someone knows and can do, right? And we know that employers are wanting to dig into skills-based hiring. They want clear proof that an employee has certain skills, and we also believe that everyone should have a fair shot at actually showing what they know and can do. And I think adaptive learning, especially now, is really how we shift from time and content being the focus to demonstrated competency, right? It can really be that engine that helps us translate learning into a skill and not just completion. And I think historically, when we think about adaptive learning, we've personalized pathways, but not proof of learning. And when I think about the opportunity here for the modern learner who's working, who's raising a family, who's bringing a lot of prior knowledge, and they're doing the best they can to navigate a system that wasn't built for them, The opportunity now is that adaptive learning and with AI, we can really diagnose what they already know, target learning to what they need to actually build their competency. And so this opportunity to really surface skills, target gaps, and accelerate progress, I think is where I get most excited. But I think the bottom line too is that it's not just about being efficient in the pathway and in the proof. It's also about for us as educators to think about how can we be high tech so that we can be high touch where it matters most, right? And so how do we use these personalized pathways and personalized ways of demonstrating competency to actually provide better coaching, human connection, feedback, and things like that. And so I think it's kind of those pieces that come together that get me most excited about the role that this can have in skills-based or competency-based approaches.
And just real quick, Lisa, I'm going to pick on you for a second since you
Yeah.
are our meteorite survivor. When you say competency or skills based, what's the difference there? How should we think
Yeah,
about that terminology?
thanks so much. So when I use the word competency, I'm really talking about your knowledge, skill, ability, but also your disposition, right? So it's not just about like, hey, I know how to draw blood. It's also about I know how to say, hey, did you remember not to eat today? You look a little nervous. Let me explain how this is going to work versus name, date of birth. Did you fast? Okay, hold on to this thing and then I'm going to draw your blood, right? Like we're talking about the full package of knowledge, skill, ability, and dispositions. When I talk about skills-based hiring, it is the shift or a skills ecosystem. It is the shift from using the degree as the proxy to be like, oh, someone has competency, and shifting to we want evidence of that competency holistically. So we know that this person is really job ready on day one. And I think Meteor Survivor is just a bit of an overstatement. I did hear it. And we've also had a lot of Bigfoot sightings as well lately that have been in the news. So just it's a lot happening in Northeast Ohio
Yeah.
right now.
I'm just excited this has become a webinar series where we can, feature these kinds of stories moving
Great.
forward. So
That's great.
with that, let's go to Mark Milliron, who, although he probably needs no introduction, is the president and CEO of National University. Mark, I think back to, 2 decades ago, during your time at the Gates Foundation, when you were talking a lot about personalized learning and just the power of this type of approach. I'd be curious, in sort of the 2 decades since then, in terms of how you're seeing this, but in particularly, I'm kind of curious from an institutional perspective now that you've been at
Yeah.
National and leading National, what do you see as sort of the renewed focus of adaptive learning and in what ways it's really helping to sort of fulfill this vision and dream that you've had for personalized learning?
It's not just me, it's a whole lot of people. No, first of all, thank you for including me in the mix. Love learning more about the meteors and all the rest. All been good. It felt, probably back in 2010, 2011, when a lot of the real deep work was happening, beginning around adaptive learning with the foundation world, with lots of people kind of diving in. Obviously, work had been done well before that. The focus was really provincial in some ways. It was all really on the courses and on the learning. And part of it was this idea of how we can use adaptive learning to kind of solve Bloom's two sigma problem, right? And in short, Bloom's two sigma problem is that personal tutoring is always a two sigma effect greater than course-based instruction because personal tutoring does allow you to get to personalized and adaptive development of those knowledge, skills, abilities, and dispositions. And we've known that for a long time. Like, that's why apprenticeships are so powerful. That's why mentorship is so powerful, like all that kind of larger work. And a lot of work went into kind of focusing on making these courses amazing and doing really advanced course design. And I think one of the things we found, especially in the foundation world, when we started doing our analysis, is the reason people were having real challenges in higher education weren't really about courses. They were about navigating the higher education infrastructure. And it was about life and logistics. And it was the fact that they were modern learners. They were Anders, as we call them, students and parents, students and employed, students and deployed. And so part of the adaptive side had to be how can you create adaptive strategies to help them navigate the learning journey? So suddenly people got into advising and personalized advising and allowing for that. And how do you do that at scale? Like I would argue in a place like National University, we're thinking about it now in 2026, is taking that all to the next level and saying, how can we use all that adaptive goodness and whether the innovations now are heavily powered by AI, obviously, not to mention with other kinds of insights to help the learning be better, the navigation be better, the connections be better, the experiences be better. And the simple way I like to say it is a lot of people are reductive about higher education in the non-competency-based models. They often talk about college as though it's a collection of classes, which I think is horrible. It's totally reductive. And I always say that, college is not a collection of classes. College should be at its best a family of experiences that happens to include classes. It might include competency-based pathways, but it actually includes connections with other students, connections with instructors, connections with professionals in your space, co-curricular activities, experiences, all kinds of other things. And our job is to curate and connect that in a way where it is adapted to who that person is and how they're approaching the learning journey. So not only can they complete, which is the low bar, but that they can actually make the most of that learning journey. And adaptive learning at its best, adaptive learning journeys at their best, help that learner suck the marrow out of their learning experience. Like literally, they meet all the people they should meet, they have the experiences they should meet, the co-curriculars, they learn deeply, they launch effectively. And that is a challenge. I mean, that is like, and we at National are on that. We're like, we've asked questions. We've basically said we're into world-class student experiences, and we use design thinking to anchor this whole process and begin with empathy. Who are our students? They're Anders, and what are they about? And what we found is students aren't coming to us for degrees. They're coming to us to change their lives. They've made a decision to change their lives, and the degree is a means to that end. But it's not just what we found, it's really about credentials, it's about connections, it's about experiences. So we're basically really doing that work of doing learning experience design, learner experience design, kind of weaving it together and saying, how do we optimize the credential set, badges, certifications, diplomas, degrees, so they have the most power they possibly can have for themselves and personally and professionally? How do we optimize the connections so they're meeting all the people, meeting their professionals, because often it's those connections that open the doors for them and help them deepen their learning, begin on a pathway. But most importantly, have those experiences. And we have like 5,000 clinical sites where people are doing deep clinical work, whether it's in student teaching or mental health counseling or cybersecurity on site. Like those experiences are everything. So I think we've leveled it up in a whole different way where now that adaptive learning is really about an adaptive learning journey. And the last thing I'll say is it can't just be about, one specific outcome. It's actually about how do they make the most of that learning journey and how do we help them make the most of that learning journey. And I think we've got some pretty exciting tools to do that.
Thanks, Mark. I think it's a really helpful context in terms of sort of the overall view of adaptive learning. I think we're going to get a lot into the role of technology within this framework that you've laid out to come. So more to come there. We'll come back to Mark in a second. But Shannon, I want to bring you and thank you so much for joining. For those that don't know, Dr. Shannon McCarty is the Vice President of Learning Instruction at Calbright College. It might be helpful to share for folks outside of California a little bit more about Calbright and what your view is on adaptive learning and sort of the types of programs you all are creating and how you're personalizing those pathways.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Noah. Yeah, and I tell you a little bit about Calbright, but I love being kind of placed after Lisa and Matt because I think a lot of what both, Lisa talked about and then Mark also talked about is the opportunities. But really, I think what we're doing at Calbright, and Calbright is California's online community college. We are a CBE model. So fully online, we serve students that are 25 plus. We have a high population of students of color. And really, our goal is to have short-term certificates that get students jobs. So really, really, truly dialing into skills and opportunities that will get students a foot in the door. So it's not uncommon for us to have students that are taking their courses or programs out of their car because they're currently homeless. So really focused in on how do we help that next generation of learners. And I think for us, it's really a holistic approach. I would say like we are doing as much adaptability and personalization as possible, leveraging tech, but also leveraging people and resources. So when we think about it, we do an early intake to identify what resources do students need. And then we're really placing them directly with those opportunities. Is it do they need peer tutoring? Is it they need a learning ecosystem? Do they need veteran services? So any of those items that we can identify really early on through an intake process, then we're trying to match students with those opportunities. And because we are a CBE model, we're also able to adapt their pacing. So we know students have lives, they're juggling multiple things. Maybe they don't have 20 hours a week to donate to their program. Maybe they have two. well, that's fine with us. We'll let you stay with us as long as you need to master the program and to get through the program. So we'll adapt that kind of sequencing, adapt the pace for students as well. And then within our CBE model, we are an assessment forward. So we do really lean into skills and looking at what are the skills that students need. And I love what Lisa talked about competencies being the higher level. So we take the competencies, disaggregate those down to the skills, and then we pre-assess students. What are the skills, knowledge, abilities that they're entering into our programs? And then leveraging that information to build that pathway. So not every pathway looks the same for students. It looks very specific to the experiences that they have and the information that they need to get to that next level of mastery. And then we're really helping to map all of that back. We map it back to the skills that they either previously have or are gaining, how they're demonstrating and mastering those skills, helping them build their resume so that they're ready to be job ready to start applying for job opportunities. We're really focused in on career services, making sure that we are pairing them with these opportunities. We're leveraging project-based learning as well. So it's like real world opportunities so they can show and demonstrate exactly what they can do. And then all of our programs are aligned with both technical and durable skills because we know it's important when students leave us, they don't just need technical skills, but they really need to know how to live and thrive in the job market. So we do use AI, adaptive learning, all behind the scenes in that. And we've also kind of dabbled with AI tutoring as well as kind of like AI feedback systems with our faculty. So doing lots of good stuff and having a lot of fun.
That's great. Well, thanks, Shannon, for joining. Excited to bring you into this conversation. So let's go to Dr. Matt Bergman, who's president and founder of the Center for Academic Innovation, which I know has just recently launched. Matt, would love to get your perspective on this in terms of how the Center for Academic Innovations work is helping, especially on the employer to higher ed partnership side, and where you see this type of work really linking up with workforce development needs.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And I'm joining you from Florida, where they canceled thousands of flights. So my family was on their way back up north to Louisville, Kentucky. And so I'm hanging out at the hotel with you all today at the webinar. But just wanted to give you a heads up that there are also flight delays, not just because of meteors. But at the Center for Academic Innovation, we really are focused on this idea of adult students and military learners and their voice. And we try to make sure that we can find ways to get them to institutions, through institutions, and to meaningful credentials. And adaptive learning is creating a really perfect opportunity for that gap to be filled where we can find out what learners know, what they can do, and what the workforce actually needs, and find that intersection and create pathways for them that are both efficient, but also acknowledge who they are and what they bring to the academic setting. And so many institutions are not where Calbright and National are. They are so far behind the curve, and we are working with a lot of those institutions that are trying to work up their practice and policy around credit for prior learning, adaptive learning, and other adult-friendly approaches. So thank you to Calbright and National for kind of laying the groundwork for what we are trying to do with so many other institutions to scale those adult-friendly practices across the United States and abroad. But specifically, we understand that not every institution has the type of focus or particularly the funding to explore adaptive learning like those at our MITs and Stanfords and the Ivies. We know that a lot of community colleges and smaller institutions now can scale a lot of this adaptive learning powered by AI. So we are looking at these models that some of my colleagues are putting forth today and trying to scale that work and hear the stories of these adult learners so that their learning is both acknowledged, valued, and creates efficiency to the meaningful credentials.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Matt, for joining us. Phill, last but certainly not least, and thank you so much for co-hosting this webinar with us. Would love to get your perspective. For folks who aren't familiar with Skillwell, it might be worth saying a minute about it, but would love to get your perspective on how adaptive learning has been evolving the last few years, and especially with Gen AI and what's changing.
Yeah, so Skillwell is a new company that we created in November. That's the combination of two Irish companies that focused on immersive and adaptive learning. And so I would just, I'm going to riff off of Mark a little bit there. There was this big boom, absolutely, about 15 years ago in adaptive learning, and it was kind of inside courses, and I think that's where a lot of the technology sits. And I think the story of adaptive learning actually maps the story of AI pretty well, because what happened was that at the same time you had this big advancement in machine learning capabilities about 10, 15 years ago. And people realized that they could do adaptive learning. Um, and so there were all these adaptive learning companies that some of them have come and gone. We actually stuck around, and there's a lot of successful stories of people implementing adaptive learning in a course. In fact, I shouldn't say this maybe on a webinar, but we actually had a bug in our adaptive learning platform last week where one client, there was evidently an unsigned integer in the database, and they have put out 2.5 billion individual personalized adaptive questions, and that triggered, they overflowed that particular database field. So one university, 2.5 billion adaptive questions. So that people have been doing this. What's happened though is machine learning was way ahead of generative AI. And the problem with a lot of adaptive platforms and programs in the past is the amount of work and resource that it takes to actually make a course adaptive is really pretty hard, right? It's a big upfront cost. And so the only institutions or courses or programs that were really willing to do that were those that were really scaled, were purely online. And so what you saw is, I think, a lot of kind of the for-profits or the large institutions with big budgets and teams of instructional designers that were building new online programs, or the publishers were able to embrace adaptive learning and do it for those scaled courses. Um, what's happening now, and what we've seen literally over the last 18 months, and even in the last few weeks, I mean, just with the evolution of generative AI, is now you can actually pair that machine learning that we've known how to do for 15 years with the ability to create content quickly that's tied directly to the skills and competencies that Shannon and Lisa were talking about. And so it doesn't take a team of 20 instructional designers and 3 subject matter experts to build an adaptive course. You still need to have that machine learning behind the scenes that's figuring out, yes, they do actually know this. I can prove it based on their work, their questions, the assessment, whatever those things are. But now with the generative AI sitting in front of it, you can actually build that content in those courses either ahead of time very quickly or even on the fly directly in reaction to the way that the learning model adapts. And so I think that this has kind of reopened the idea of adaptive learning. I'll call it like democratizing the idea of adaptive learning, where again, the institutions that I think have done it successfully for the last 15 years are the ones that have had big teams or resources running big courses with big sections, or publishers that are able to acquire adaptive learning companies and then put their own content through it. Now I think this is available to a lot broader audience than was ever available before, and that's super exciting for universities, colleges, vocational schools, and most of all for learners, because I think they're going to get a better opportunity because of the promise that we always said of adaptive learning, which is we're going to respect the things that you already know and not spend a lot of time on those, and then teach and verify the skills and competencies that we're going to teach you throughout the course. And I think if we can deliver on that now with this combination of machine learning and generative AI, it's going to be really a really powerful opportunity for everybody else to take advantage of what I think was only available to a select few in the past.
Awesome. Well, let's bring everybody in, and we'll have a panel conversation. I see some snaps and claps from our panelists to Phil's remarks. Mark, I'm actually going to invite you to comment first because I'm curious just in terms of some of the things that you've seen over the evolution of adaptive learning, and thinking about Phil's comments in terms of the role of Gen AI and sort of what's next. How do you think about these sort of like moments of change, and how do we ensure that we're accelerating this in the direction that benefits the learner?
Yeah, I think one, just applaud Phil's kind of holistic take on it in terms of the direction we've gone to. Again, I'm leveling it up to the entire learning journey because I actually think there's an adaptive element to that kind of takes it to the next level. what was really disappointing, and Phill, I don't know how you feel about this, but 15 years ago, there was a lot of smoke and mirrors around adaptive learning. When you got underneath the covers, oh my lord, the people that were claiming adaptive learning, it really wasn't adaptive learning at scale. Even the people who had money, who were doing something big, actually turned out to be, almost fraudulent, or just, but I'll just say, in a public venue where I don't want to get sued, like, wow, like that was not good. What I do know is then there were people who were doing really good kind of micro detailed work in very specific contexts. The military was doing really fascinating work on adaptive learning, and then you saw people, especially in the world of developmental education, remedial education, they were doing really fascinating work. And then you saw like the Michigans of the world doing really cool stuff, or like the work that was done around stats that was just kind of really amazing. The whole mathway statway work within it. And I think we learned a lot in that process, but Phill nailed it in that, like, it took a lot of time and energy and research focus to do it. And then when the machine learning got there, you understand where the challenges were, you had to figure out, how did I respond? How can I respond to that quickly? I think the ability now for us to use the combination, and remember, it's all AI, just generative AI is a kind of AI, right? The machine learning has always been what we just didn't call it AI because it scared people, in terms of a marketing tool. But the idea of this is all using versions of artificial intelligence, quantitative, qualitative, and generative. The ability now to weave those together, where now I can say to you, oh, I can tell you're having this challenge, and other people like you have had this challenge and found this curricular resource to be helpful. I can now serve that up to you, and then it's another test. And I can see whether or not it's successful. And guess what? That just gets smarter and smarter and smarter. You actually get to Bloom's Two Sigma thing, where you suddenly are developing these super smart tutors that are helping people in real time make better choices. And I've used this example for a long time, Noah, and I don't know if it resonates, but I come from a large and diverse family of 9 kids, and we had no background in higher education whatsoever. So when I was going on a higher ed journey, when I started at a community college, I literally didn't know what an AA was or an AS was. I kind of knew what BS was, right? I was totally faking it as I was going through it. And for me, like, little by little, the right people started showing up and scaffolding me and helping me make better choices and go in better directions. And what I would argue is that adaptive learning in many ways is like suddenly wrapping the support around a person, especially from a first generation low income background, that privileged people have always had. Because trust me, when you work with, if you go to Cranbrook, or if you go to Sidwell Friends, or you go to Dalton, if a kid's having trouble in math, like, they've got relatives who can come help them. They've got friends. They're going to hire tutors. Like, the world's going to show up to help them get smarter and develop that larger pathway. And now we've got the tools at our disposal where, like, just like Phill said, it's democratized, where a kid in inner city DC who's struggling with this can now get the adaptive resources to get that right to their fingertips, which I think is deeply inspiring. But I want to make sure we raise our aperture and think not just about the learning moments, but think about the learning journey. Because I think there's so much about that reinforcement of that movement where they get positive direction around it, where we can get better and better. And then how do we involve people in this process to continue to guide them? Because I think you said something about I think the idea about making sure we use technology for keeping human. The words I've always used is we should be using technology to make human moments precious. Right? People should not be reciting stuff that's already in a textbook. It should be like me inspiring you or making you think different and go directionally. So I'm pretty hopeful about where we are with this. I think we now have these tools at our disposal to help not just with learning moments, but with learning journeys. And we've got to, I think now is the time, I feel strongly about this, for us to learn together. We've got to come together and share what's working and what's not, and not just fall for the marketing, but actually just kind of get in and be willing to share what's working and what's not, and not just assume because it's technology it's right. No, we got to dive in and make sure we're getting to the right place. But there's never been a time where, like, we need collective wisdom more than ever before. It's not just artificial intelligence, it's collective intelligence. We got to come together around that stuff. I don't know if that made sense, but like,
Yeah, no, it's great. And Matt, I saw you, it looked like you're about to chime in. I don't know if there's a particular piece of this that you wanted to weigh in on.
No, I was just going to say that when we do research around what keeps students around, what keeps students in meaningful credentials, degrees, AAs, AS, BS, and even beyond into graduate programs, it is these human moments. But just like Mark said, leveraging AI, leveraging technology to facilitate that is the key here. And I think, what you're doing, Mark, is should be applauded and should be replicated, scaled, and be adapted into everything we're doing across the country. So many institutions are struggling with resources, human resources, and the use of adaptive learning, AI, and everything in between should be leveraged in a way that creates those, human moments, human precious moments. I love it. So I'm right there with you.
It's a great way of describing it. Lisa, I'd love to get you back into this, especially in terms of thinking about even to some of Mark's comments about the learning journey and Phill and what we've seen over the last, 15 years or so. I think that there's in some ways a parallel story around CBE and competency-based education and sort of what's possible. And obviously assessment plays such an instrumental role in terms of this. So would be grateful for your thoughts in terms of how are you seeing this change? What do you see as the possibility here on the horizon for scaling CBE?
Yeah, this is probably where I get most excited is around the opportunity here to go from just like, adapting content to actually like simulating performance, right? And so I'll just give a very real example was working with a state that was creating a competency-based apprenticeship pathway for teachers, 16 faculty fellows across the state for teacher prep. And I said, how do you assess classroom management today? And almost all of them, without exaggeration, said it's a 3 to 5 page essay on your theories of classroom management, a quick case study on what you would do in this scenario, and you write that up. And you might even design your classroom, like give us a picture of what your ideal classroom looks like. And like that was how we assess classroom management. I'm a former high school principal and high school English teacher. You could write the most awesome essay and still be scared to death in front of 35 teenagers, particularly when a couple of them might have some choice words for you. So what we did was we used simulation software, avatars, AI enabled to simulate a learning environment where that teacher candidate goes in, teaches a lesson, and one of those students starts to misbehave. And so to be able to actually practice that and to have to react to someone saying, this is stupid, why do we have to do this? And when you reply, they say, why do you have to be such a, you know what? And you have to actually respond in that moment. That is a better indication and better practice for an aspiring teacher than the essay. Just to be clear, I'm also an academic. We still need the knowledge and to know the theories. I'm not saying we don't need that, but this opportunity to actually enable real world scenarios, interactive and iterative practice and feedback, like that's to me the real breakthrough here is that we can now assess applying a competency and not just knowledge. And I think it really finally helps us connect the dots between learning, doing, and being ready for something on the job. And so we see institutions, state systems, more and more leaning into this as another performance-based assessment pathway that can kind of supplement some of those knowledge-based pieces that we've had in play for so long that haven't yielded good results and haven't shown us that someone's really competent.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we actually have some great questions coming in on the Q&A, by the way, that I just realized. So thank you for flagging that. But I actually want to work in one, and Shannon, would be great to get your take on this and kind of coming off of Lisa's comments, because Kate in the chat or in the Q&A asked, around the role of this in helping busy adults, and especially in thinking about like from an institutional perspective, what are the ways that we can help make sure that learners aren't just starting in these programs, but are persisting and I'm assuming completing is also sort of a big piece of this question as well. So would love your thoughts there, Shannon and Mark. I actually think this is a great one too to get your take on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, completion is definitely the key, right? And it can be very challenging, especially when adults have competing other priorities. And so I really think it's a lot of kind of what we talked about, and it's making sure there's that sense of belonging And I think belonging looks very different to every student in their pathway and where in their journey. And so really thinking about like that system at large, and then how do you connect people at the right time? How do you provide the right services at the right time? And I think that's like the opportunity to really leverage technology. So it's either like nudging, it's either connecting in real world, kind of like synchronous opportunities, putting them together with peers, providing all those opportunities up front for students, but also like as they're in that journey and you identify like you're falling off, like reaching out and trying to bring them back. Other thing that I would say about adult learners is it really needs to be relevant. Also a high school teacher and always hated the question, why are we learning this? But now as adults, if I can't answer that and I don't know what we're putting in front of an adult student, like we're in trouble, right? Like they want to be able to take that, apply it, and then make sure that it's going to get them the job that they need. And so really making sure that whatever we do, it's really like project based. I love the kind of simulation of learning as well. We even leverage some like the AI tools to do the interviews. Because one of the things that we know as adult learners, if they've been out of the job market for a while, interviewing is a skill. And so it's much more, I would say, relaxing to interview in front of a simulated kind of AI individual than to walk into a job and then start doing the interviews. So I think it's just making sure that things are real world, authentic, but then making those key connections along the way.
And Mark, it'd be great to get your thoughts on this, especially given the Anders that you mentioned at the beginning.
Yeah, I think, we embrace and Angela Baldassari is our deputy chief of staff, and she's our VP over this, kind of the catalyst of our student success science across the university. And we've been doing a bunch of work together on the Anders showcase. What we have learned in our work is, well, we use a couple of tools. One of them is called the Lost Momentum Framework, where we actually take our data and we look across the entire journey of a student from entry. The whole idea is connection to entry to progression to completion. And we look at that entire student journey, stitch it together, and we look at the data and say, where are we losing students and what is gaining momentum for students? So you need to look at like, where are you hemorrhaging students? And then what is helping them really kind of get momentum? And if you look at those metadata across those different places and we pulled our teams together from across the university, from our enrollment advisors, our faculty and staff, our student activities people, like everybody. And we started analyzing that and looking at the data points and tried to unpack those data. And then we said, okay, there are 50 things here, but there are 5 that account for 90% of the variance. Like, let's tackle those 5 things. And so I'll just give you a few of them. Like one of the things we found out in particular that we absolutely had to deal with a new population of students for national. National is 50,000 students, third doctorate, third master's, third bachelor's, but our undergrad is an average age of 30, 33. Like so, but suddenly we have this new population of 18 to 24-year-olds that were having issues navigating a different kind of institution. So we call them our new and blues. The new and blues, we got to get in and help them navigate the higher education pathway in a different kind of institution. And often it's because they're in a sustenance work environment, not in a career environment where they're trying to rise, if that makes sense. And because they're working at Starbucks as opposed to working as a teacher when they want to get a master's and move up, that's a different kind of population. So we figure out how to deal with that. Then we had a whole group of people who were close to the finish line who weren't getting, so we had to go after that. And then we found out there's this whole group, and this is probably most important for here, that it was all about friction. There was friction in our system that we had to get out, and that's where we really tackled our transfer agreements. We with our community colleges. We really tackled our the ability to kind of look at prior learning and be able to map that in and try to get as consistent as we possibly could with that. All of our policies and practices that were creating friction in the registrar's office and other places, we went after it and said, let's try to reduce the friction so that these moments are really kind of wonderful, more positive moments. And then it wasn't just the problems, and I'll close with this one. You got to look at the possibilities. How are you going to create these moments that create momentum for students, but also kind of help them stick? So I'll give you a silly example, and it's right here over my shoulder. You can see the winged box that's behind me if you can look on that, if you guys can see that. We found out that one of the biggest, we measured NPS. NPS is the willingness of somebody to recommend you to somebody else because of this. And one of the things we found is these moments really matter. And by the way, read The Power of Moments by Heath and Heath. Read Unreasonable Hospitality by Gudera. Phenomenal books that'll help you kind of like your team jump into this. The last major moment for our students was when they got their diploma, not when they were walking across the stage, when they got their diploma in the mail. And that moment was a manila envelope from Jostens. And we said, like, my Lord, we have to redesign that. And so we actually got a whole team together, and we've now created this thing called the diploma box. So when somebody's going to get their diploma, we have a big, we've kind of stole the box opening from iPhone. And we said, let's redesign this entire experience. We created this box. We send them a note ahead of time telling them that their diploma box is coming so it can be an opening with them and their friends. And remember, these are Anders. Some of them can't come to a graduation. This is the one time they're going to celebrate. They get their box, it's branded with national. They open it up and the wings unfurl. And a big national university is there. Our mascot's a peregrine falcon, so the wings make sense. The wings come out, and then their diploma is there. There's a letter from the president, stuff from the alumni organization, and it took what was this wah wah moment and turned it into this like wow, like I've got my diploma. And you might think it's goofy, but we have gotten so many responses from students who just say, the fact that you took the time to design this moment and think about it. So, like, I would tell you, look at your lost things and then look at your momentum and kind of like your ability to curate and create these moments. That's going to show those adult learners, those non-traditional learners, those working learners that you see them and that you care about them and you're trying to create moments for them. And when they see that, boy, they're gonna lean in with you and they're gonna be more likely to succeed.
Yeah, that's so helpful, Mark. And I'm by the way, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat and in the Q&A around the technology side. So I want to make sure to pivot a little bit in terms of the conversation. Phill, this would be a great place to bring you in. You know, we've got one question around sort of the role of simulations in terms of like and are they, high priced and sort of the cost and how it's implemented. And then I think we have another question around, has the technology and specifically with AI developed well enough to actually do the assessment around a realistic project? So I'd love to get your take on both of
Oh,
those.
I think the comments earlier were spot on, that several people have made, where the idea of a multiple choice test being the only way that we assess people in adaptive learning models just doesn't make sense. The simulation, the idea, first of all, total respect to high school English teachers, could never do it. You guys are stronger than I will ever be. But yeah, I think that if you go back, so simulations, part of the start of Skillwell was some research out of Trinity College Dublin that showed that simulations were an incredibly powerful form of learning, sometimes actually better than human to human learning because of some of the things that were mentioned, psychological safety. Do you really feel comfortable talking about difficult topics with your teacher or another peer or something like that? Or do you want to practice that ahead of time? And so, like, simulations might be a great form of assessment in an adaptive learning context. But the problem with simulations historically has been they're incredibly expensive and difficult to implement. Why? Well, I'll give you an example. So, one of our clients is Costco. They use simulations to train their managers. And for us to do their simulations 18 months ago, you had to shut down one of their stores or go in after it closed, hire some actors, get a film crew, write some scripts, and then do film 38 different branches of a simulation based on skills. That's a very expensive proposition and something that universities that have tight budgets just aren't going to be able to do, right? Now, with avatars, generative AI, synthetic media, you can create simulations that allow people to practice and then even assess them in real world environments using generative AI and synthetic media. And that can take, I mean, we can generate a 15-minute simulation in 20 minutes, where it used to take 2 or 3 days of shooting live action film. And you can do that with real human characters. You can do that with cartoon-based characters. There's a lot of different ways to approach it, but that's just one example of a way that a different form of assessment, and it has that same effect that
Yeah.
that I mentioned before, and then Mark reiterated it. It's now democratized some of these forms of assessment.
Yeah.
Right.
By the way, Phill, that is the one of the most popular parts of our nursing program is that they call that the in-between space between the textbook and the clinicals. Our metaverse campus is wildly popular because it's a fail-safe environment. They can try that assessment again and again and again until they get it right, and then they get it observed, and they will hold on to their video of them doing it right, like a badge of honor that they finally got it. And I love the fact that they're able to kind of lean in and get that kind of like interactive response, it's good stuff.
And how many labs would you have to create, or how many actors would you have to hire to do that manually? And now you can do all that. So it's democratized something. And I think another one of the questions is asking about writing is another example where it used to be, doing a true writing assignment used to be really hard to manage and grade and all of those things. And now there are a lot of tools that can help you do that more effectively. So I think maybe one of the things that we talked about the technology, machine learning and also generative AI. But I think now what's happening is people are letting the pedagogy catch up with where we are now and saying, oh, I didn't realize now I can use simulations in my course because I can create one in just as fast as I can create a multiple choice test, or I can create an immersive environment or a detailed research project because I know that my students are going to be able to complete it because of these technologies. So I think a lot of this is kind of what I'll say is a convergence between machine learning, generative AI, synthetic media, but now I think pedagogy and also just the availability of content to support this. I think all of these things are converging to make it much more possible for people to create much more interesting courses or certificates, and different ways to approach it. So I think we're at a very interesting point for a million different reasons, not the least of which is the meteor that struck in northern Ohio. But like I think there's a lot of things happening that can really make this accessible for the average university, the average instructor, somebody building a new course, or as Mark and several others have said, it's not just about the learning content. There are ways to do this at the experiential level as well that just weren't possible even 18 months ago, right? And now they are. And that's really, really exciting, both as a technologist and as an ed tech enthusiast.
Yeah. It's really interesting to think about the possibilities, and I see a question that popped up in our chat around sort of the power of Skillwell and this type of technology and sort of simulation and adaptive learning more broadly with like gateway courses. And I know you were talking a little bit about this, Phill, and actually Lisa and Matt, I'd be interested to bring you in on this too. And I know Lisa, CBEN has been doing a lot of work in terms of thinking about as students, especially when they're returning adults who may be coming back to entry level college math and college algebra, who may know a certain percentage or the majority of the content, from and can actually prove it from their work, but can't quite, pass the assessment. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this, and also related to that, how you sort of see this playing out, especially in the credit for prior learning space, where people may be able to demonstrate again partial or certain skills, but that may not line up exactly with a full course.
I'm happy to kick off, and I want to start with that last part, Noah, which is like the credit for prior learning piece and what we would call credit for competency. So often for general education, like stats, algebra one, etc., it's the only way you're going to demonstrate prior learning for those is because you have another college course that you took way back when and it counts, right? And I think the big challenge for all of us is to get very clear on what are the competencies and the durable skills that a gen ed curriculum teaches us, so that we can give credit and skills for that. So if it's quantitative literacy or if it's critical thinking, we need to be able to articulate that and not just say, oh, these gen ed courses, yeah, you took liberal arts, you're a critical thinker. It's like, no. How do we know? Where did we assess it? Where did we measure it? And if we can get clear on that, then we can unlock credit for competency regardless of where it happened. And so I think that's just a piece where it's not just a tech tool that will help us get there. It's a tech tool with a real transformation of general education requirements to be in line with the competencies and skills of the future, which we need. Because the reality is, in 10 years, I don't know what jobs will be lost to automation and AI, but I can promise you that the ability to be empathetic, compassionate, connect with other people, those kinds of things will continue to be important. So I would actually say there's a broader question here around gen ed redesign and getting clear on our durable skills and durable competencies that we want. And then the other thing I'll share more tangibly in the short term is we did a research study that was published in partnership with Lumina Foundation, looking at Algebra 1 as a barrier course and the competencies there. The quick headline there is that college algebra is asking learners college algebra 1 to demonstrate twice the skills of high school algebra 2 in half of the time. And so we are actually putting a larger cognitive demand. We went skill by skill. We're putting a bigger demand on those Algebra 1 learners. No wonder it's a barrier. If they're coming straight out of high school, we're asking them to do twice the cognitive load in half the time. But when we used an adaptive, personalized tool to help them to get credit for the competencies and skills they did have and only focus on the ones they need instead of the traditional Algebra 1 course, we actually found that learners were able to complete on target and actually not experience it as a barrier course. And I will look for that link and potentially we can share it out after this webinar. But I think part of it too is just getting very clear on what are the skills and competencies, leverage the tools that exist, but then also there is this fundamental redesign and transformation that has to happen in gen ed if we're going to really teach the skills of the future when we don't know what those jobs might be.
And Matt, I see you came off mute, so would love to get your perspective.
Yeah, and that's where that adaptive learning, and not to necessarily endorse Skillwell, but we're learning much from you all, Phill, and we have been stuck in this adult-focused effort to try and re-engage people in a course match ideal around credit for prior learning. And what adaptive learning and what competency-based approaches do, they're just powerful in their ability to translate workplace learning into kind of visible, validated skill development. And they can really identify what people know very clearly and meet them where they are. And I think that's the key element here is we've got to meet folks where they are, but we've got to have capacity to do so. And there are comments in the chat and questions about capacity, and we're all at a capacity deficit in higher ed. You know, we've got lots of forces pushing up against us. As a 20-year faculty member, I have been in that cycle of looking at what we can do within our budget to try and adapt, to innovate. And those are the challenges. But because of AI and because of some of these great opportunities like Skillwell to introduce adaptive learning and then also CBEN's connection here, we can do this at scale somewhat affordably. We just have to lean in. And I'm saying that to myself as a faculty member as much as I would say that to anybody on the panel or beyond, because we are strapped for time, cash, and opportunity, and we have skepticism in higher ed. That is not a great place to be, so you fall into this deficit mindset. At the Center for Academic Innovation, I work with these kind of national experts that have cracked the code on how to serve adult learners. And some of that is really rooted and based in this human touch, these stories, so that we can compel individuals back into the space. And then we can also give the faculty, staff, and administrators resources that will remove some barriers and take some of the friction out that Mark mentioned for these really very traditional institutions.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, Matt, often what you find is specific courses are killing people, right? That's the gatekeeper course phenomenon. And the work you're talking about around, again, math in particular, math is like one of the absolute killers, and the Mathway Statway work is absolutely worth taking a look at, especially around this kind of larger comp. But Candace Steele was talking about this with statistics 15 years ago on this whole idea you can teach statistics like in half the time with twice the results if you redesign and adapt it, right? And that's where I think we've but the last thing I'll say around this is one of the things we've seen is even with this kind of redesign and adaptation, it's hard to get institutions to adopt it at scale. Even when the outcomes show it, how much more positive it is, we've got to get out of our own way. Like our cultures and processes sometimes stop us from using the very tools that are going to help our students the most. That's where like things like competency-based education have a problem because people just have a challenge with the modality as opposed to, or the methodology as opposed to the outcomes that are going to come out the other side.
Yeah, well, I think go for it, Matt.
And I would just say, kudos and salute to you, Shannon and Mark, for laying the groundwork for a lot of more traditional institutions that are in some ways capability and capacity strapped. But when you do these things, when you lay that out, when you show the way, those more traditional institutions can do that at least incrementally, where maybe they're not doing it at scale and they don't have the wings popping out from their diplomas, but they can do some of these smaller items to try and at least skill up or scale up some of the work that you all have proven to be successful.
Yeah. Well, just kind of teeing off of what Mark said, I do think that there's a real opportunity here to ensure that we are collectively learning from each other. And I know this was something we had talked in some of our earlier conversations about with this panel, and would love to get everyone's perspective on how do we ensure that we are learning together and that institutions can continue to move forward in a way that understanding, Matt, to your point, there's a lot of capacity issues. There's a lot of other things that are rightfully taking up attention at institutions, let alone Meteors in Cleveland, for what it's worth. But seriously, there are a lot of these other issues out there, and would be curious, like how do we sort of help create a community and help ensure that we're learning from each other and advancing this work in the right way? Shannon, I'll ask you to go first if you're comfortable sharing your thoughts.
Sure, I would love to. I do think there's a sense of urgency. I think we're kind of this turning point, right, where we all know that, AI is coming. We want to make sure that, or not coming, it's here, but we are also like helping our students prepare. And so I do think there is, and Matt, you mentioned it earlier, just the idea that like there's kind of a loss of belief in higher education. So I think the more that we can share what we're doing, talk about like what is working well, but also be really honest about what is not working, because no one institution has figured it out completely. We're all still on this learning path. And also just, I think, making sure that as we bring individuals along, we're being thoughtful and kind of applying our own durable skills to being empathetic, being understanding of that we are all kind of strapped for time, resources, and money. And I think that that can help, really kind of bridge that path. I think there are lots of opportunities for, colleges, small colleges like Calbright that are really trying to build pathways to work with larger institutions to think about what that looks like, but making sure like that student experience is very seamless. But I think it's a kind of, really understanding that there's urgency. And the more that we can get away from antiquated behaviors and antiquated practices, the better off we'll be and the better we can help serve our students.
That's great. And I realize we only have 3 minutes left, and I want to get everybody in one more time. And thank you, Shannon, to help conclude us. So, Matt, I'll sort of toss it over to you for final reflections, thoughts on what's next, maybe in 30 seconds or less for everybody who's left.
I would just want to say it's been a long journey to have adult learners actually get a seat at the table at very traditional institutions, and I'm grateful for that. And I think this is the turning point for adaptive learning to take hold, for AI to be leveraged in a way that is both positive and impactful and create these meaningful human precious moments, as Mark stated.
Mark, final reflections.
We are in a moment of desperate need, but unbelievable possibilities. I think we just have to do our work internally at the institutional level, but also, by the way, at the policy level. We have accreditation, state and federal policy work we have to do that'll help us like free this kind of innovation to really make the impact. But let me tell you what, we're at the precipice. We've got the tools right at our disposal, but I'm going to make the call for us to learn together again. Though we've got to be willing to roll up our sleeves and be forthright about what's working and what's not. And I've found in my career that often these conversations are driven by, I call them the dogmatic diatribes of either side, where you've got caustic cynics who are angry about everything and true believers who are way too over their skis about how great something is. We actually need the middle. We need true believers and careful critics who are willing to kind of like really unpack how we can do this. I think we can help radically more people. I mean, I don't remember which one of you said it, but we can democratize these pathways like never before if we do this work in the right way.
Awesome. Lisa.
I would just say this is not about a new shiny tech tool. It's about transformation, right? It's about cross-institutional collaboration. It's about aligning around the durable or the common competencies that we know are of value. It's about partnering with employers to better understand what that can look like. And that transformation can't just be about tech or can't just be done in a silo with institutions on their own doing it. I think it's going to require an ecosystem approach to that. And one thing we didn't touch on is that because of the culture of higher ed, we do need faculty support and training for them to understand how to leverage and use these tools if it is going to help us transform what we do. And I think if we do that, we can personalize education and we can make it more meaningful for the modern learners that we serve.
Awesome. And Phill, thank you so much again for co-hosting this. Would love your final reflections and word before we close out.
The short story is we actually do have a very tight time frame on this. I mean, my son is 12 and the triplets are 10. So we need to solve all of these problems. I made my 529 contribution yesterday, just in time before the tax deadline. So like, if you guys could solve all of these things in 6 years or less, I would appreciate it very much personally. No, I think this has been great. I mean, I've learned so much from this conversation. I hope everyone else has. You know, at Skillwell, we are trying to make adaptive learning and immersive learning, democratize those to allow things that used to be available only to people with big budgets or big instructional design teams to do. And that's really our goal. And we've been successful at that for a while in certain pockets, and now we're trying to bring that to the masses now that we have generative AI at our fingertips. And so delighted to have this conversation, delighted to hear the stories about the momentum of it. We've got a lot of great pictures in my mind, both starting the conversation with skills-based hiring to a diploma with wings. Like there's just a lot of really good stuff that has me inspired to go keep trying to solve this problem. So we're looking for partners that are interested in trying to solve some of these problems. If you're interested in that, check us out at Skillwell, reach out to me or others on the team. But also thank you to Whiteboard for hosting this and to the great panelists. I mean, what a great
Yeah.
group of people that are really trying to drive this kind of change.
Well, thanks, Phill. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Shannon. And again, we do hope to do more of these webinars and be on the lookout for a next one, which will likely be in May. So thank you again, Skillwell, for co-hosting this and look forward to seeing everyone next time.